There is a kind of strength the world never applauds. It doesn't look like power. It doesn't announce itself. It wakes up before sunrise, ties its shoes quietly, and carries everything without asking for a single hand. Amira Rhodes was that kind of strength. A woman who showed up every day to a job that made her invisible, and still chose, in a moment that could have changed everything, to be honest when no one was watching. Hyun-jae Ahn had built an empire on reading people. He could spot deception across a boardroom. He could sense ambition behind a smile. In 41 years of life, he had never once met someone who surprised him. Until her. He told himself he was just curious. That following her was simply due diligence, a CEO making sure the people in his hotel were trustworthy. He told himself that lie for exactly 3 days. By the 4th night, standing in the cold outside a small house on the east side of Atlanta, watching a light glow warm and steady through a curtained window, he stopped pretending. What he saw that night didn't just change how he saw Amira Rhodes. It changed how he saw himself. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful man in the room finally meets someone who doesn't want anything from him. About secrets carried in silence. About a woman who decided, a long time ago, that love was a luxury she simply could not afford. And about the man who decided, quietly, stubbornly, without her permission, to prove her wrong. Before we begin, if you've never been here before, welcome. This channel is a place for stories that make you feel something real. Stories about ordinary people carrying extraordinary weight and finding, against all odds, that they don't have to carry it alone. If that sounds like something you need today, hit subscribe and leave a comment below telling me, have you ever done the right thing when no one was watching? I would genuinely love to know. Now, let's begin. The On Grand Atlanta opened on a Thursday in March, and by Friday morning, Hyun-jae Ahn had already memorized the name of every department head, the floor plan of all 22 stories, and the exact number of steps from the service elevator to the presidential suite. He was that kind of man. Precise, contained. The kind who never needed to raise his voice because the room already knew to pay attention. He was 41 years old. He had inherited his father's company at 29, after a stroke had taken director On from a boardroom in Seoul to a hospital bed in 3 hours flat. Hyun-jae had been in London for a financial summit when the call came. He had taken the first flight back, sat by his father's bed for 6 days, and then walked into the Seoul headquarters and quietly, methodically, taken over everything. He was not cold. That was the thing people always got wrong about him. He was simply a man who had learned, very early, that feelings were expensive, and that someone who ran a company with 40,000 employees across 8 countries could not afford to pay that price. The Atlanta hotel was the first American flagship. His father had dreamed of it. His father, who was now 73 years old, living in a house in Busan with a night nurse and a garden he could no longer tend alone. Hyun-jae had promised him. Opening this hotel was the promise. So he was there in person, not delegating, not sending a deputy. There, walking the floors, checking the light fixtures, tasting the restaurant menu, reviewing every department. That was how he came to be standing near the end of the 14th floor corridor on a Friday morning, reviewing a maintenance report, when Amira Rhodes came around the corner with her cart. She didn't see him at first. She was moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had done this long enough to stop thinking about the mechanics of it. The cart angled perfectly around the corner, the master key already in her hand before she reached the door, her movements quiet and economical. She had the quality of someone who had made peace with being invisible. She saw him when she was 3 feet away and stopped. There was no flustering, no performance of surprise. She simply met his eyes, nodded once in acknowledgement, and told him good morning. She would come back to 1412 when he was done. He waved her through. She nodded again and went past him without another word. He watched her for exactly 4 seconds longer than he should have, then went back to his report. He thought nothing of it. That was a lie, but it was a comfortable one, and he was good at those. The incident with the envelope happened 9 days later. A guest had checked out of suite 1420, a technology executive from Singapore, staying 4 nights. A man whose company On Group had done business with twice. He'd left in a hurry, as wealthy men often did, trailing assistants and luggage handlers. He'd been gone 40 minutes when Amira went in to turn the room. The envelope was on the desk. Cream-colored, unsealed, thick. She didn't need to count it to know it was cash. The weight of it, the way it sat. She opened it because it was her job to identify what guests left behind before logging it as lost property. $12,000. In banded hundreds. She stood there for a moment. Not a long moment. Long enough to be human about it. Long enough to think about her father's medication refill at the end of the month. Her mother's orthopedic appointment. The transmission warning light that had been blinking on her car for 3 weeks. Long enough to feel the weight of $12,000 and understand exactly what it would mean. Then she put it back in the envelope, sealed it, and walked it down to the front desk herself. She didn't know that Hyunjae's head of security, a man named Daniel Park, who had been with the An family for 15 years, had flagged the suite on the departure log and pulled the room camera feed as standard protocol for high-value guests. She didn't know that Daniel had called Hyunjae directly, not out of suspicion, but because it was the kind of thing his boss needed to see. She didn't know that Hyunjae An watched that footage twice. He watched her open the envelope. He watched her pause. He watched the exact moment the calculation happened behind her eyes. Not greed, not even temptation exactly, but the honest weight of a woman who needed money and was staring at more than she made in 4 months. And then he watched her seal it back up and walk it downstairs. He sat with that for a long time. The next morning, he pulled her personnel file. Amira Celeste Rhodes, 34 years old, born April 12, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. Hired at the hotel 3 years ago, in February, 6 months before the On Group acquired the property. Previous employment, housekeeping supervisor at a Marriott property on Peachtree for 4 years. Before that, 2 years at a hotel near the airport, entry level. No gaps, no disciplinary notes, not a single complaint. 2 commendations, one from a guest, one from a former manager, both citing the same word, trustworthy, trustworthy. He set the file down. He made a decision, right there at his desk, that he was finished thinking about her. He started noticing things he hadn't noticed before. The way she was always the first cart in the corridor in the morning. The way she remembered which guests didn't want their blinds touched, which ones wanted extra towels without asking, which rooms needed the thermostat set before the occupant returned. The way she moved through the hotel like someone who had decided, long ago, that if she was going to do this job, she was going to do it as if it mattered. He found himself taking the 14th floor more often than the layout of his day required. He was a man with reasons. He always had reasons. Noise levels near the elevator bank. A carpet seam issue facilities had flagged. A renovation detail that needed his eye. He deployed these reasons liberally and did not examine them too closely. They spoke a few times. Brief exchanges. He asked about a guest complaint unrelated to her floor. It gave him a reason to stop. She answered directly. No unnecessary softening, no performance of deference. She said what she thought. She said it calmly. Once, in the service corridor, he held a door open for her. She looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. Not quite, because she was too careful for that. But the edges of it were there. You don't have to do that. I know. He let the door close behind her. She went through without looking back. He thought about that exchange for the rest of the afternoon. The night he followed her. It wasn't planned. That was the truth he would have to sit with later, that he had not decided in advance, had not set up surveillance, had not engineered anything. He had simply been leaving the hotel at 8:45 on a Wednesday evening, stepping out to clear his head after 12 hours of meetings, and he had seen her at the bus stop on the corner. He had stopped walking. She was in street clothes now, a dark coat, bag on her shoulder, Something about her posture different from how she held herself at the hotel. Not worse, just unguarded. The hotel Amira was polished and contained. This Amira was tired in the way people let themselves be tired only when they think no one is watching. He should have kept walking. He knew that. Every reasonable version of himself knew that. He got in his car and followed the bus at a distance, and he would spend the next 6 weeks trying to explain to himself what he thought he was doing. She rode for 31 minutes. He drove slowly, always 3 or 4 car lengths behind, telling himself he'd stop at the next light, at the next turn, at the next anything. He didn't stop. She got off on a residential street in East Atlanta. Not a wealthy neighborhood, not a dangerous one, just one of those streets that looked exactly like the people who lived there. Practical, weathered, holding on. She walked 2 blocks to a small house with a porch light on and went inside without pausing at the door. He parked across the street. He sat there telling himself this was already too far. He had already crossed something he couldn't uncross. He should start the car. He should go back to his hotel suite with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its 600 thread-count sheets and forget that any of this happened. Then the light in the front room shifted, warmer, like a lamp had been turned on. And through the thin gap in the curtains, he could see movement. He saw her take off her coat. He saw her go to the back of the house. He saw a different light come on. And then, very clearly, he saw her come back into the front room with a tray, medication bottles, a glass of water, and sit beside an armchair where an older man was already settled. He couldn't hear anything, but he could see everything in the way she moved. She handed him the glass. She waited while he took it. She put her hand on his, just briefly. That gesture that needs no translation in any language, in any country. The gesture that simply means I'm here. The older man's hand shook. Not dramatically. The small, continuous tremor of someone whose body had started to betray him. Parkinson's, Hyunjae registered, recognizing it because his own father's hands had started with the same tremor, 3 years ago, right before the diagnosis. He sat in that car for 40 minutes. He watched Amira Rhodes take care of her father. He watched her move to another room. Her mother, he guessed, because after a few minutes he could see 2 figures through a doorway, and the stillness of one of them had a different quality. The stillness of someone who needed to be oriented, who needed someone else to be the anchor. He watched her serve dinner. He watched her wash dishes. He watched her sit at the kitchen table alone for exactly 7 minutes, with a glass of something and her eyes closed. 7 minutes. That was what she allowed herself. Then she stood up, put the glass in the sink, and went back. Hyun-jae drove back to his hotel in total silence. He sat in the parking garage for another 20 minutes before he could make himself go inside. He did not sleep that night. He told himself he would do nothing with what he had seen. He would simply know it, and knowing it would be enough. That was another comfortable lie, and it lasted about 4 days. He started creating reasons to cross her path. Small ones, transparent ones, probably, to anyone paying attention. A question about the hotel's laundry protocol on the upper floors, something he could have asked anyone. A comment about the fresh flowers in the corridor. She had rearranged them, she explained, because the original arrangement blocked the light from the window, and blocked light made spaces feel smaller. He looked at the flowers for a long moment. You didn't have to do that. I know. The words came back at him like an echo of the service corridor. The same tone, the same steadiness, not looking away. He almost smiled. She didn't. But something in her eyes did, just for a fraction of a second, and he caught it the way you catch a coin spinning in the air, quickly, before it falls. He began to learn her schedule not from the HR system, which he technically could access, but from observation. She started at 6:30. She took her lunch break at 11:15, always 15 minutes shorter than she was entitled to. She left at 3:30, unless she had picked up an extra shift, which, he noticed, she did twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Too many hours. He kept that thought where he kept the others. He began to notice her face more carefully, not the surface of it. He had trained himself for years not to read people by their surfaces, because surfaces were managed, surfaces were performance. He read the things people didn't know they were showing. The tightness around her eyes some mornings that suggested she had not slept well. The way she pressed her lips together briefly, barely visibly, when she thought she was alone. A gesture of someone who was having a private conversation with herself, who was recalibrating, who was holding something in place by sheer force of will. She was carrying something. He knew that shape. He had been carrying something himself for 13 years. The day he found out about the appointment, he was not looking for it. That also was the truth. He had a meeting that ran long. It was a Thursday, 6 weeks after the hotel had opened, and he was crossing the lobby at 12:40 when he saw her moving through at a pace that was different from her usual pace. Faster. A different coat on, her bag over one shoulder, and an expression on her face that had nothing to do with the hotel. He followed her. Outside, half a block. She went into the medical building 2 streets over. One of those large practice complexes with a dozen different specialists under one roof. He stopped on the sidewalk. He didn't follow her inside. That was the line he held. He stood on the sidewalk in the thin March cold and waited, because he needed to know that she came back out, and that was the only explanation he had for himself. She was in there for 45 minutes. When she came out, she looked different. Not broken. She was not the kind of woman who broke in public. But there was a stillness about her that had a new weight to it. She stood on the pavement for a moment, and he watched her take one slow breath in and release it with the precision of someone who had learned to master the physical response to difficult news. Then she checked the time and walked back toward the hotel. He waited several minutes before going back inside. That evening, he asked Daniel Park to find out, discreetly, carefully, with none of it going on any record, what practice was on the 2nd floor of that building. Cardiology. He sat with that word for a long time. He thought about her father's trembling hands. He thought about the extra shifts, the shortened lunch breaks, the 7 minutes at the kitchen table. He thought about a woman who was working as hard as her body would let her. And he thought about why. She was not building a savings account. She was building a safety net for 2 people who depended on her completely, and she was doing it against a clock that only she could hear. Hyun-jae-an, who had restructured debt portfolios worth billions, who had negotiated across 3 continents with some of the most powerful men alive, who had never once found himself without a strategy, sat in his hotel suite that night and could not think of a single thing to do. Not because there was nothing he could do. There were 100 things he could do. That was almost the problem. The things he could do, she would refuse. He already knew that, as certainly as he knew anything. Amira Rhodes was not a woman you helped without her permission, and she would not give her permission. Not to him, not to anyone. So he did the only thing available to him, which was to change nothing and feel everything, which was arguably the harder option. It started with small things, the kind that could be explained away. He approved a new benefits package review, something that had been sitting on his HR director's desk for months. The review included enhanced health coverage for all hotel employees, effective immediately, fully employer-funded. He did not make a point of it. He signed the form and moved on. He started eating lunch in the staff dining room once a week. The first time he did it, the room went quiet for approximately 10 seconds, and then people slowly returned to their conversations. Because Hyun-jae-an had a quality, he had always had this quality, of making the space around him feel normal, even when his presence in it wasn't. He ate. He listened. He didn't perform accessibility. Didn't make a show of being one of the people. He was simply there. The third time he ate in the staff dining room, Amira sat 3 tables away with 2 other women from housekeeping. He didn't seek her out. He didn't maneuver closer. But in the natural course of the hour, their eyes met twice, and both times she didn't look away immediately, which, for Amira Rhodes, he had come to understand, was something close to an invitation. After that, he started talking to her differently. Not in the careful, hierarchical register of employer and employee, but in something more honest. He asked her what she thought about the renovation of the East Wing lobby. Not what her department thought, what she thought. She paused in a way that meant she was assessing whether the question was genuine, and when she decided it was, she answered with the precision of someone who had formed strong opinions she'd never expected anyone to want. The East Wing lobby was too formal for the neighborhood, in her view. The hotel was positioned in a city with a specific history and a specific energy, and the lobby communicated none of it. It felt imported, which was fine for a luxury property in Seoul or Tokyo, but in Atlanta, luxury that felt imported felt like it was turning its back on where it stood. He looked at the lobby for a long moment. "I think you're right." She looked at him like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. A half-smile crossed his face. "Thank you, Miss Rhodes." She nodded and went back to her cart, and he went to call his design director. A week later, the East Wing lobby had new art on the walls. Works by 3 Atlanta-based painters, local, layered, full of the city's colors. He didn't tell her he'd done it. He didn't need to. She saw it when she came in on Monday morning. He wasn't there. He heard about it from Daniel, who had seen her stop in the middle of the lobby for a full 30 seconds and look at the paintings, and who had mentioned it the way Daniel mentioned things he thought were important but couldn't explain. That was the week Hyun-jae stopped trying to call what he was feeling by any name other than what it was. He was 39 when his last relationship had ended. A woman he'd been with for 2 years, kind and intelligent and patient with his hours, who had finally sat across from him at dinner one night and said, with a gentleness that made it worse, that she didn't think she could spend her life loving someone who had decided love was too expensive to fully invest in. She hadn't been wrong. He'd known that immediately. He'd also known, in the 3 years since, that she was probably the last woman who would have been willing to try. He was 41 now. He had built everything his father had asked of him and more. He had everything that was supposed to be enough. He was watching a woman who had almost nothing, and she was the first person in years who made him feel like he was paying attention to something that mattered. What he didn't know, what he had not let himself find out through official channels because some lines he would not cross, was the full weight of what Amira carried. Her parents, William and Denise Rhodes, had both declined in the same 18-month window, beginning in the summer of 2022, when Amira was 32. Her father's Parkinson's had progressed from early-stage tremors to something that required daily management. Her mother's dementia was the slow-building kind, the kind that gave you months of almost normal before pulling the thread a little more, then a little more, until the woman who used to quiz her daughter on multiplication tables at the kitchen table now sometimes forgot her daughter's name before remembering it again. Amira had been the only child of 2 only children. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins nearby. She had a friend named Tasha, who brought groceries on Sundays and stayed for 2 hours, and another named Camille who called every Thursday without fail. That was the village. That was all of it. She had found out about her heart 8 months ago. Not a death sentence. She was always careful, even in her private thoughts, to be precise about that. A structural issue. A valve that was not performing as it should, that was putting strain on the surrounding muscle, that had been developing quietly for years while she worked double shifts and drove across the city and didn't sleep enough and ate whatever was fastest. The cardiologist had been kind, had said the word surgery with the careful neutrality of a person who understood that the word landed differently in different lives. The surgery cost more than she had. The hospital payment plan would cover it, eventually, but eventually was a long time. And in the meantime, her parents needed her, and she was the only one there. She had not told anyone at work. Not Tasha, not Camille, not completely, not the full picture. She had told them there was a thing with her heart that they were monitoring. She had used a tone that said, "This is not something we are going to catastrophize." And because they loved her, they had matched the tone. She had not told anyone because she had learned, a long time ago, that telling people things gave them the right to have feelings about those things. And she did not have the capacity right now to manage other people's fear on top of her own. She was managing. That was the word she used with herself. She was managing. The extra shifts were for the surgery fund. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening she stayed until close. She had also picked up a Saturday morning shift at the hotel's in-house laundry. Off the books, paid hourly in cash. Something a colleague had arranged. Something that existed in the gray space between sanctioned and not quite officially approved. She needed every dollar. What kept her going was not grand or poetic. It was specific. It was her father's face on the nights when he was clear. Really clear. The medication doing exactly what it should. And he would look at her across the dinner table with that look he had. The one that said, "I see you, baby girl. All of you. And I'm proud." It was her mother humming in the kitchen on good mornings. It was the knowledge that she had chosen this. Chosen to be the one who stayed, who showed up, who was there. And that choice, even when it was heavy, was the realest thing about her. She did not resent her life. She had examined it carefully for resentment, the way you check a structure for cracks, and she did not find it. She was tired. She was scared, quietly, in the private chamber where she kept the things she didn't say. But she was not bitter. What she was, more than anything, was determined not to need anyone. Because needing people was where it started to fall apart. Needing people meant depending on them, and depending on them meant that when they left, and people left, she had the data on this, you lost not just the person, but the part of yourself you'd given over to them. She couldn't afford to lose any parts of herself. Too many people were depending on the whole of her, so she was very careful about Hyun Jae-an. She noticed him. Of course she noticed him. She was not a woman who missed things, and he was not a man who was easy to miss, not because of what he looked like, but because of how he occupied space. The quality of his attention was unlike most people's. When he looked at her, she had the sensation of being actually seen, which was both more welcome and more dangerous than she wanted it to be. She noticed the lunch visits. She noticed the East Wing lobby. She noticed the new benefits package. She had read it twice when HR sent it out, standing in the break room, and she'd had to take a moment because the health coverage change alone meant something specific and significant to her situation. A business decision, she told herself. She was not going to assign meaning to anything. She was a grown woman who understood the difference between a man paying attention and a man who was safe to let in. She was very, very good at telling herself things. The problem was, she was even better at knowing when she was lying. It was a Tuesday evening in late April when everything shifted. Amira was finishing a late shift, not an official extra shift, just a favor to a colleague who'd had a family emergency. And the hotel was quiet in the particular way that hotels get quiet after 9 o'clock. Not empty, but distilled. The guests who needed things had needed them. The corridors had settled. She was waiting for the service elevator when Hyun-jae came around the corner, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, which she had never seen before. He was carrying a folder and looked like a man who had been staring at numbers for too many hours. He stopped when he saw her. Late. Not a question. He said it the way he said most things, as an observation that expected a response, covering for someone. The elevator came. They both got on. The doors closed, and for a moment there was nothing but the hum of the mechanism and the particular intimacy of a small space at 9:15 on a Tuesday. "How long have you been here today?" His eyes were on the floor numbers, not on her. The question was quieter than his business voice. She considered not answering. Then, "Since 6:30? He didn't respond immediately. The elevator stopped at the lobby. They both stepped out, and she thought he would go one way and she would go another, and that would be the end of it. Instead, "Have you eaten?" She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that quality of attention she had categorized as dangerous, and she made a decision in the span of about 2 seconds, a decision that surprised her even as she made it. No. They ended up in the hotel's kitchen, after hours, because Hyun Jae-on had a key to every room in the building, and apparently no awareness that what he was doing was unusual. He heated something from the refrigerated prep section, competently, which surprised her, and they sat at the prep counter on opposite sides. She thought they would talk about the hotel. She had a version of herself prepared for that conversation. Instead, he leaned back against the counter and asked her to tell him about Atlanta. And somehow she did. Not everything. Not even most things. But she talked about growing up on the East Side, about the way the city had changed around the neighborhood her parents had lived in for 30 years, about the specific quality of Atlanta summers, the heat that was a living presence, the way it changed the sound of everything. She talked about her father, carefully, the way you describe someone precious, not the diagnosis, not the difficulty, just the man. A man who had worked in facilities management for 30 years and could fix anything with his hands. A man who had raised her alone for 2 years while her mother recovered from a surgery of her own. A man who had never once made her feel like a burden. Hyun-jae listened the way he did everything, completely, not waiting for his turn, actually there. He sounds like someone worth being proud of. She looked at her food for a moment. He is. There was a pause, and she felt it move, the space between them becoming something neither of them had authorized. She looked up at him. "Why do you keep finding reasons to be on the 14th floor?" He didn't flinch. She gave him credit for that. "Because you're there." It was a simple sentence. It had no performance in it. It landed the way honest things do, without protection, without padding, and she felt it somewhere she hadn't expected. "That's not a good idea." "I know. I work for you." "Technically, you work for the hotel, which you own." He tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the point. She meant the next words to be a closing statement, a door, a clear line. "I'm not looking for anything." The problem was that she could hear, as the words left her mouth, that they sounded exactly like something you say when you're in the process of reconsidering it. "I'm not asking for anything." A pause. "I just wanted to know if you were okay." She went very still. Because that was the question nobody asked. The question she had specifically arranged her life so that nobody would ask. She was so good at seeming okay. She had calibrated it precisely. "I'm fine." He looked at her. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just looked at her with that clear, even gaze of his. And she had the unnerving sensation that he could see exactly where the fine ended and the other thing began. Okay. And they finished eating in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which was itself somehow the most alarming thing that had happened all evening. 2 weeks later, her father fell. It was a Wednesday morning. She was at work. Her mother called from the neighbor's phone. Denise Rhodes, who on most mornings could no longer reliably use the device they'd bought her, had somehow found the clarity to go next door and get help. The neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had known the Rhodes family for 20 years, was the one who called an ambulance. Amira got the call at 7:50. She was on the 14th floor. She stood in the corridor for exactly 3 seconds. She counted them. Later, the way the mind files strange details away in moments of crisis. And then she went to find her supervisor. She walked past Hyun-jae in the lobby without seeing him. He saw her. He saw her face. And something in him moved before his mind could analyze it. He followed her to the employee area, stopped at the doorway because he wouldn't cross into that space without permission, and waited. She came back through in 3 minutes, her bag on her shoulder, her coat half on. She stopped when she saw him. For a second, she just looked at him, and in that second, something she normally kept perfectly managed was right on the surface. My father. That was all. Where? Grady. I need to... I'll drive you. You don't... Amira. He said her name for the first time. Not Ms. Rhodes. Her name. Just her name. And it stopped her. Now let me drive you. A beat. Then. Okay. They drove to Grady Memorial in silence. Mostly. She had her phone in both hands, the way people hold their phones when they're waiting for a call that might be the worst call. And he drove without trying to fill the space. Once she spoke, almost to herself, he was doing better this week. He'd been doing better. He didn't offer something useless. He kept his eyes on the road. He's lucky to have you getting to him. She pressed her lips together once, nodded, and looked back at her phone. Her father had a fractured wrist and a bruised hip. Not catastrophic. The word the doctor used was stable, and Amira's whole body visibly reorganized itself around that word. Hyunjae stayed in the waiting room. He did not follow her in to see her father, because that was not his place. She was gone for an hour and 20 minutes. When she came back, she looked like someone who had cried and repaired the evidence carefully. She sat down next to him in the waiting room. He's okay. They're keeping him overnight for observation. My mother... I need to call Mrs. Patterson. My mother can't be left. Already handled. She turned to look at him. The hotel's concierge team has a list of vetted care services. Someone is already with your mother. She stared at him for a long moment. He watched her process it. The relief, and underneath the relief, something more complicated. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to. I don't... She stopped, started again. I don't need you to fix things. I know. He held her gaze steadily. I didn't fix anything. Your father is okay because your mother had the presence of mind to go to the neighbor, and because you got here. I just made sure you didn't have to worry about two things at the same time. She was quiet for a moment. How much do I owe for the care service? Nothing. Hyunjae? It was the first time she'd used his name without the formal title. Neither of them pointed it out. Consider it a benefit of employment. We're going to add emergency family care to the package. I've been meaning to do it anyway. It just got moved up. She looked at him for a long time. He held the look without flinching. You're not as subtle as you think. I'm not trying to be subtle. She exhaled slowly. There was a pause before the next words came, and when they did, they were quieter. The real voice, not the managed one. I'm scared. He could tell from the quality of it that she was not talking about the fall, or her father, or the hospital. He didn't rush to fill it. I know. My life is very complicated. I know that too. You don't actually know the half of it. Then tell me. Quietly. Like it was the simplest thing in the world. She didn't, not that night. But she also didn't tell him to stop. She found out on a Friday afternoon, in the middle of May. She had gone to Daniel Park with a question about the emergency care service. A practical question about how to request it going forward. And Daniel, who was a good man but not always a careful one, had let something slip. A reference to the medical building. A knowing way of looking away. She had put the pieces together in about 30 seconds. She did not say anything. She thanked Daniel and went back to her floor and finished her shift with the same precision she always brought to it. And when her shift ended, she went to the 14th floor linen closet, which was the one place she had found in this hotel where she could be briefly alone, and she stood there for 5 minutes, not crying, thinking. He had followed her home. He had found out about her appointment. He had known about her heart, or suspected, or guessed, and he had said nothing. He had done things without telling her. He had seen her, in the most private version of herself, and made decisions around what he saw without asking her permission. She was angry. She let herself feel that clearly, because she was a woman who believed in being clear about what she felt before she decided what to do about it. She was also, underneath the anger, something she didn't immediately want to name. She went to find him at 5:45 when she knew he would be in the management office doing end-of-day review. She knocked. A pause, then his voice. "Come in." She entered and closed the door behind her. He looked up. He read her face immediately, and something in his own became very still. "You followed me home." A pause. "Yes. You had someone look into my medical appointment." Another pause. "I had someone identify the building. Not your records, not your diagnosis. I wouldn't—" He stopped himself. "No, I won't qualify it. I crossed a line." "You crossed several lines." "Yes." She looked at him. He didn't move to justify himself. He didn't look away. Her voice was very even. "I am not a project. I am not a story about a hardworking woman that gets to make you feel like a better person. I am not something you get to observe and analyze and quietly manage. I have a life. It is mine. Every part of it. You're right. I know I'm right." She crossed her arms. "So, explain it to me, because I can't figure out." She exhaled. "What you thought you were doing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at her. "The night I followed you, I didn't plan it. I stood outside your house for 40 minutes because I didn't know how to leave. I watched you take care of your father. I watched you take care of your mother. I watched you sit at your kitchen table for 7 minutes, alone. And I thought, that's what she gives herself. 7 minutes." Amira was very still. "And then I found out about your heart." His voice dropped slightly. "And I sat in my suite and there was nothing I could do. I couldn't offer you help because you wouldn't take it. And I couldn't not know what I knew. And I couldn't stop." He stopped. "Couldn't stop what?" He met her eyes directly, caring what happened to you. The silence that followed had a different quality than the anger that had been in the room before. "That doesn't make it okay." "No, it doesn't. You should have talked to me. You wouldn't have told me anything. That's my right." "It is." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry, Amira. Not as a formality. I am genuinely sorry for the part of this that was about my own need to understand you without asking you. That wasn't fair." She uncrossed her arms slowly, pressed her fingers against the edge of the desk for a moment, then stepped back. When she spoke again, her voice was level and direct, the voice she used when something was true and she was going to say it out loud for the first time. "My valve needs surgery. In the next 6 to 9 months, or the strain on the muscle gets worse. It costs more than I have right now. I'm working extra shifts to build the fund. My parents need someone to manage their care, and I am that person, and I intend to keep being that person. A breath. That's my life. Those are the complications." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for telling me. Don't make it into something I have to manage. I won't. And don't—" She paused. Something shifted in her expression. "Don't treat me like something fragile. I am not fragile. I am tired and I am scared sometimes and I am dealing with a lot. But fragile is not the word. No." He held her gaze. "It really isn't." What changed after that conversation was not that she let him in, exactly. It was more that she stopped actively working to keep him out. It was a subtle distinction, but it mattered. The difference between a door locked and a door simply closed. Between a wall and a boundary, he was careful. She watched him be careful, and she knew it was intentional, and she did not pretend not to see it. He asked before he did things. He checked in rather than assumed. He shared things about himself, not as strategy, not as exchange, but because the conversation had developed that quality where honesty begat honesty. She found out about his father, about the stroke that had happened 12 years ago, when Hyunjae was 29, about the 6 days he'd sat at a hospital bedside, about the way he had taken on the company, not because it was what he wanted, but because it was what his father had built, and his father's hands had started to shake, and someone had to hold it. She heard that story and she thought about her own hands. Never shaking, always steady, holding everything. And she thought that maybe that was what she recognized in him. Not wealth, not power, but the shape of someone who had organized their entire life around not letting someone they loved down. When did you last do something just because you wanted to? They were in the hotel garden, a conversation that had started because she was trimming a dead plant near the courtyard door, and he had stopped on his way somewhere and simply not left. He thought about it seriously, which she had come to expect from him. I can't remember. Me neither. They stayed there for another 20 minutes, doing nothing in particular, and that itself felt like an answer to the question. He did not offer her money for the surgery. He did not offer to pay. He understood, without being told, that that offer would undo everything. What he did, quietly, over several weeks, in ways that required no acknowledgement, was make sure the hotel's new healthcare plan included coverage for pre-existing cardiac conditions. He made sure the enhanced plan was retroactive to January. He made sure the plan's definition of covered procedures included the specific type of valve repair she needed, without ever having officially read her file. She knew anyway. She had always been good at seeing what people didn't want to announce. She didn't say anything about it for 10 days. Then one morning, passing him in the lobby, she stopped. The new health plan. He met her eyes. Comprehensive coverage is standard for all employees. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, and he could see the cost of it in the slight set of her jaw, the concession being made. Thank you. I mean it. You don't have to carry everything alone. That's all. I know how to carry things. I know you do. That's not what I said. She looked at him a moment longer. Then, very slightly, she smiled. It was the first time he had seen her really smile, not the professional courtesy version, but the one that reached everywhere. He thought about that smile for the rest of the day. The surgery was scheduled for the 2nd week of July. In the 6 weeks between the day she told him and the day of the procedure, they had become, she was precise about this in her own thinking, something that did not yet have a name. Not because names were unavailable, but because naming it felt like it would put pressure on something still fragile, the way newly set bone shouldn't bear full weight. He brought her coffee once. Just once. Because he seemed to understand that doing it repeatedly would tip from gesture to claim. He set it on her card on the 14th floor one morning without comment, and when she looked up, he was already walking away. She held the cup for a moment before she drank it. She took him to meet her parents. That was the thing she hadn't planned, the thing that happened because her father had a particularly clear Wednesday evening, the medication working exactly right, his mind sharp, his humor present, and Hyunjae had given her a ride home because her car had finally surrendered to the transmission issue, and she had looked at her front door and then looked at him and said, "Do you want to come in for a minute?" He did. Her father was in his armchair. He looked at Hyunjae for a long moment, and Hyunjae looked back at him with a quality of respect that was not performance, the kind that comes from recognizing, in another person, something you understand. "Amira tells me you run a hotel." "A few of them, sir." "You know how to fix a leaking faucet." Hyunjae considered this seriously. "I know how to call someone who can." Her father made a sound that was almost a laugh. Honest, at least. Her mother was having a quieter evening, present but soft, the way some evenings went. She held Hyunjae's hand when Amira introduced them, and looked at him with the uncomplicated openness that the illness sometimes brought. "You have a kind face. Thank you, Mrs. Rhodes." After he left, her father looked at her for a moment. "He came all the way in just for a minute." "Yes, he'll be back." "Dad, I'm just saying what I see, baby girl." He patted her hand. "You've been carrying things alone for a long time. It's okay to put some of it down." She sat with that for a long time after he fell asleep. The night before the surgery, Hyunjae came to the house to sit with her parents while Tasha and Camille were with Amira at pre-op. He didn't tell her he was going. He simply showed up, and her father greeted him like someone expected, and her mother held his hand, and he stayed until the night nurse arrived. When Amira found out, the next morning, after the procedure, waking up to Tasha beside her, she was quiet for a long time. He didn't say anything. Tasha's mouth curved. "Your father told a long story about fixing a boiler in 1987. Apparently, he was very interested in it." Amira looked at the ceiling for a moment. Something in her chest that had been braced for a very long time began, slowly, to release. She was in recovery for 4 days. He visited once, because he understood the grammar of this, which was that too much would feel like possession and too little would feel like absence, and he had learned to read the precise space between those two things. He brought her a book. Not flowers, not fruit, not anything that required maintenance. A book, one she had mentioned once, weeks ago, in passing. A collection of essays by a writer she'd loved since college. He had remembered. She looked at it, then looked at him. "You remembered that. I remember most things you say." She set the book on the blanket beside her. "Sit down." He sat. For a while they just talked. Not about anything urgent, about the hotel, about Atlanta in summer, about a documentary she'd been watching, about his father, who had called twice during the week and was already demanding a full report on the American flagship. "Tell him the East Wing art is excellent." He smiled. "I'll tell him it was a local recommendation." She looked at him for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said. In the hospital, that first night with my father. That I don't have to carry everything alone." He waited. "I've been carrying things alone for so long that I think I forgot it was a choice. I thought it was just who I was, what I had to be." "It's what you chose to be. That's different. Is it? You could have let things fall. You didn't. That's a choice, not a condition." A pause. "The question is whether you're willing to make a different one." She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the small dry warmth she sometimes let through, "You are very patient for a man who runs 6 hotels." Seven. Even more impressive that you have time to sit in hospital rooms. I make time for things that matter." The words sat in the room without decoration. She looked at him steadily. "I don't know how to do this. I want to be honest with you about that. I know how to be strong. I know how to manage. I don't know how to let someone be part of something with me without waiting for the part where they leave. I know. A beat. I'm not great at it either. I had a woman tell me once that I wasn't capable of fully investing in love." "Were you?" He considered it honestly. "Not then. No." "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I drove 40 minutes behind a bus in the dark because I couldn't make myself stop thinking about a woman who returned $12,000 she could have kept. And I stood outside her house in the cold for 40 minutes, watching her take care of people she loved. And when I found out her heart was struggling, it was the first time in years that something had woken me up at 3 a.m. that wasn't a business problem." She was very still. "I don't know if capable is the right question. The right question might be whether I'm willing to try." A pause. "I am." She looked at him for a long time. Then, my life is still complicated. I know. My parents still need care. I'm still in recovery. I still have a lot of things I'm figuring out. I know all of that. And you're still my employer. I've been thinking about that. I'm promoting you. She stared at him. That is, guest experience director, which is a position I'm creating because the hotel needs it, and you are the most qualified person for it. It's not charity. You will earn it, and you will probably find it irritating. She was quiet for a moment, and then, against what seemed like her intention, she laughed, not politely. A real laugh, sudden and warm, and it filled the hospital room with something that hadn't been there a moment before. He looked at her laughing. He thought he could get used to that sound for the rest of his life. You are, she managed, when she'd recovered, the most controlled, impulsive person I have ever met. I've been called worse. She settled back against the pillow. Some of the brace in her posture, that permanent readiness she always carried, had softened, just a little, around the edges. He noticed it the way he noticed everything about her, which was closely. Or ask me again, in a week, when I'm not in a hospital bed and I've had coffee that doesn't taste like a paper cup. Ask me again and I'll give you a real answer. Fair. He stood. He picked up his jacket. He was at the door when her voice came from behind him. Hyun-jae. He turned. The boiler story from 1987. A beat. Was it actually interesting? He thought about it. Some of it. He has good instincts for narrative structure. She smiled again. That real one. Good night. Good night, Amira. He walked out into the corridor, and for the first time in a very long time, Hyun-jae walked somewhere without already thinking about the next problem. He was just thinking about her. That felt like more than enough. The east wing of the Grand Atlanta was full on a Thursday evening in January, which was not a night anyone would have predicted as a sellout when the hotel had opened the previous March. But Hyun-jae had learned, from a woman who knew this city in her bones, that Atlanta in January was full of people celebrating the things they'd survived the year before. Amira was not in housekeeping anymore. Her office was on the mezzanine level, a small office with a window that looked down into the lobby, which she had arranged exactly once, and then left alone because she had too much else to do. Guest Experience Director was a title that had turned out, as promised, to be genuinely irritating, because it required her to manage people's expectations of perfection in real time, and perfection was a moving target. She was good at it. She was, frankly, exceptional at it. She had redesigned 3 service protocols in her first 2 months, and guest satisfaction scores for the Atlanta property had climbed to the highest in the ON portfolio. Hyun-jae had mentioned this to his father during a video call in November. His father had said, in Korean, that he would like to meet this person. Hyun-jae had said that he thought that could be arranged. Her father's wrist had healed. The hip bruising had resolved by September. He had a part-time aide now, covered by the health plan and supplemented by a home care arrangement that Amira had negotiated with the precision of someone used to getting the most from limited resources. Her mother's good days still outnumbered the harder ones, and Mrs. Patterson still came for coffee on Wednesdays and pretended not to notice that things were more stable than they'd been a year ago. The surgery had worked. Her cardiologist had used the word excellent at her 3-month follow-up, and Amira had sat in the parking lot afterward and allowed herself to cry for approximately 6 minutes, which was slightly shorter than the average, but longer than the 7 she used to allow herself at the kitchen table. Progress, she figured, was progress. She and Hyun-jae were now something with a name now. Had been since the Tuesday evening 2 weeks after her discharge, when he had asked her again over coffee that did not taste like paper cups, and she had looked at him across the table for a long moment and then said, yes, not dramatically. Not with conditions and disclaimers and maps of all the ways it might go wrong. Just yes. It was not without friction. She was still, constitutionally, a woman who found receiving difficult, and he was still a man who defaulted to solving things without asking. They were learning each other the hard way, which was also, she had come to believe, the only way worth learning. But there was this. On Thursday evenings, when the hotel was busy and her office was full of the sound of people having a good time in the lobby below, he would sometimes appear in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and lean against the frame and not say anything in particular. And she would look up from whatever she was working on, and he would look back at her, and it was the easiest silence she had ever been inside. She had thought for a long time that love was a luxury she could not afford, that it required a kind of available space she had filled up with necessity. What she was finding out, slowly, against her own resistance, with all her characteristic precision, was that love was not something that took up space you needed for other things. It was something that expanded the space, that made the carrying lighter not by removing any of it, but by changing the quality of the air around it. She had been carrying a lot for a long time. She was still carrying it, but she was not carrying it alone. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not counting down the minutes until she could rest. She was already home. Thank you for being here. Amira Rhodes carried everything quietly, for so long, before she learned that she didn't have to carry it all alone. If this story touched you, if it made you think of someone in your own life who carries things in silence, share it with them today. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and leave a comment telling me, what's one thing you've been carrying alone that maybe you don't have to? I'll be reading every single one. I'll see you in the next story.